To be together today. Good to be continuing this journey of the Fit Body Boot Camp as summer is over. Is that fair to say? No more summer's moving along. Man, can you believe how fast it's going? It is, if you're, I guess that's mainly it, qualified if you're a school-centered home, like K-12 education or college. Maybe I could, pull that back just a little bit, that would be the group. But our culture seems to be so much on that same rhythm, and our communities and stuff that are alive because of the young families in the school, that man, it's over. Drew, my oldest, who's doing his student teaching this year, this is his last semester of college at Grand Valley State University. Then he will be a high school teacher, but he had a report last Wednesday for new teacher development and professional development days, that kind of stuff.
Sure.
Andrea, actually, she's playing hooky from her first day tomorrow. She's got permission, but we're taking Nick, my middle son, to college tomorrow. He's going to Grand Valley State, so we're moving him in his dorm room. And then Andrea teaches, and Emily will be a sophomore at Lowell High School, and they both start Tuesday morning. So for all practical purposes, summer's over, right? It's done. Let's hit the fall. Let's find high gear, and let's really go after it is kind of what I am thinking the MO needs to be. How many of you have ever had a really good idea kind of backfire on you? Yeah? And there's funny times where that happens because you're actually planning, you're almost like doing a little bit of conniving. You could call it, and then it backfires on you, and that's one thing. But here's a plan that just backfired on me this last week that I wasn't trying to not have this happen, but when it happened, it was like, oh man. So someone had a great idea a week ago that if we gave $100 bills away to the body, and it was then our responsibility to take the $100 out and bless somebody, because of last week being our theme of serve his cause, defined by serving his cause, ultimately doing redemptive acts in other people's lives that you're trying to help restore goodness in their life. And centering that on identity stuff, like they're a child of God, and then they're loved and they should be whole, realizing that in their life. And there's little things we can do all along every single day that help people, convey that to people as what's really true about them. How we interact with them can help them find their identity, and we can serve them by building up their identity. The dignity, we really went into that last week, of their worth. That do you know the worth that you have and that you contribute every day? It is worth you getting up. People do notice if you're there or if you're not. Doing acts and serving His cause, when we serve people, we're trying to help them know that true identity, know their true worth and value, and help them feel like they have that purpose that God has given them in their lives. So the $100 was to bless somebody in that kind of way that does that. So we did it, taped them all under seats, and this was such a good idea because it was going to challenge the faith. Ultimately, I didn't know this, but there was a big line right here that I had drawn last week in all of this thinking that it was going to be for you guys. This would be great for you guys to have that kind of a faith exercise of having $100 that you have to go out and bless someone with and stuff. And then what happened, though, is on Tuesday, Susan rechecks the worship space in here to make sure all the envelopes were received or found or whatever, and she finds 3 of them. That's not good, because I then have to make a decision what to do with those 3. And technically my first thought was, well, those can just go right back into the fund. No problem, that kind of deal. And then the more I thought about it, that was like, well, that's pretty weak. That's pretty cheap, if you're just going to put them back in it, because here's the opportunity for you to do what everyone was just challenged to do. So who in here received one of those $100 last week? Yeah. Was that a blessing to you to be able to be a blessing to others? Was that in hindsight, or was that when you first got it, were you super excited about being able to do that? Super excited. Okay, you are more faith-filled, Jesus-loving people than I am. Because what hit me when those 3 envelopes, and I realized I need to do that, I just went into like faith crisis mode. Of like, do I really believe what I believe? Do people really want acts of kindness and goodness done to them? Or is there the wall that we know is up with everybody? How big is that wall? How thick is that wall? And how hard is it really to break through that wall? So let's just refer to myself for the rest of this story as Chicken Little, because that's kind of how I was feeling with the opportunity to have $300, and I didn't know if, right away if I was going to use all of them or how this was all going to go, but it just absolutely unsettled me to think about having the opportunity / responsibility and how was this actually going to go. So that was Tuesday that we found those, so it was maybe like 3 o'clock in the afternoon. So the rest of Tuesday, I was just anxious about what to do with that and how I was going to do it. Didn't have a clear plan or an immediate thought. But what was immediate was the anxiousness of the responsibility and the opportunity kind of colliding. Looked for some opportunities over the course of Tuesday and Tuesday night, but nothing really just kind of jumped out. No human interactions, no real place to go and do something. I had ideas developing, but nothing concrete. Wake up Wednesday morning, again, still ultimately just feeling it in my gut, like this heaviness of acting out on the faith that I claim to have and that I'm challenging everyone to, right? Can I just be honest about this and these feelings? So I'm driving around Oak Lawn, like eyes open, just kind of looking, watching, trying to feel led to do something, see somebody, go somewhere, and come up with not really any good ideas initially. So kind of I was basically pouting and went to Starbucks, which, why not? That's, I think, maybe my outlet, and that might be more often the case of why I do go to Starbucks, is I'm in some kind of pouty mode and stuff. But I went there kind of with the intention of, all right, I'll do something there. I'll go there and I'll do something there. And so, not knowing exactly what I was going to do, went in there, got a coffee, went over, sit down, and sat down then, and was still, trying to figure out exactly what to do and what would maybe work or whatever. So then thought, we've all heard of like the person who pays it forward kind of thing. So I thought, okay, I'll buy a gift card, I'll leave it with the cashier, the barista who makes the coffees and this kind of stuff, that they'll just distribute it then to everyone after me who goes, and I'll just hang out over there in the shop. So go and do that, get a gift card, load it with this, and the guy, Alex, doesn't really understand what I'm asking, which was kind of funny. I was like, no, use this on the rest of them. So you want 100 on this, and then like that, and then just pay for everyone else who comes up. It was funny, in my mind, I'm just trying to share the authentic reality, because I think you're like me. I think this might scare you, and you're going to deny it, but I think you're like me when it comes to these human qualities within us. So I intentionally didn't tell him not to tell people that it was me. For one reason, I was feeling like, I was feeling like that might be kind of weird, like, no, I don't want anyone to know, I'm just doing this kind of thing. That seemed like that would have been an awkward interaction with Alex. So I didn't say that, and I certainly didn't say, let everybody know I'm over there and the one doing it. Like, I'm going to stand here and shake every hand. And, it was like way more subtle, way more whatever, this kind of deal. So, long story, a little less long. I don't think there's any way this baby's getting short. So I'm over there, and really this is not me, and I don't want to do this, but I realize I'm kind of I'm working here on the counter that faces the window, but I kind of open my body this way. The counter's like over there by the cross or something like that. And the first 4 people that come rushing over to me, just thanking me with all kinds of gratitude. Like, I can't believe you would do that. That's amazing. Thank you so much. That's made my day. And like I am like Peter in the boat with the deep water fishing, reluctant to drop down the net, but when the net goes down, the catch is so big that Peter does. That's exactly what he did. He crumbled under how amazing God is when you do what he is asking you to do, even if it's reluctant obedience. Chicken Little was a reluctantly obedient Christ follower that day, but I did that, and person after person just came over appreciating that. This guy Will was like, thank you so much. I hope you are in here the day that I do this, because I'm doing this. This is awesome. This is incredible. And it's like, this was some of my self-doubt was, it's Starbucks. Everybody's coming in here already with $6 to buy a coffee. Like, what, that's probably, and really, beforehand, I'm like, that could probably be annoying. They probably are going to think I want something. You know, that's like my self-talk going on to this. There's a gimmick. I'm not even sure they would let me do that in Starbucks, because they're going to think, you know, I'm up to doing good or something. Well, how did my mind become, you know, doubtful of them wanting that to happen kind of stuff? So about 6, 8 people later, Alex, the guy working the counter, comes out with the manager, and they just want to meet me. What's your name? Thank you for doing this. This has made our store just light up today. And Alex reiterated just this, like, this made my day. And I'm not even getting anything free, but to see people's reactions is astounding. And there were other just cool, and I would say, well, this is just something my church was doing. We wanted to be a blessing to people and do some good, so you have a really good day. And again, there was so much reciprocal, like, we're going to do this. I've done that. I've bought somebody's before, you know. So all this, like, just is popping. One of the older gentlemen, and this was, so faith stuff was happening and being exchanged within it, because the one guy, he was a little bit older, but he said, thank you for doing this. My grandson goes to Notre Dame, and he's like this. He's like you. So this would be, and this is, I'm making this up, but I'm guessing he's not a Christ follower. He's not a Christian. But he's trying to identify that he knows what I'm doing, and that that's a great thing, and that his grandson is doing it too. And let's celebrate that. And again, the sincerity of everyone that came over and that kind of stuff, it absolutely blew me away. And it was, again, a radical faith story for me. Again, it's just a cup of coffee at Starbucks with people who technically can already afford it, right? They're there for that. But I jotted down, like, in my notebook, people are like so full of goodness and gratitude. They're just waiting for something to happen so that they can overflow that. It was like poking them with a pin, and they're like, oh, I'm so glad you did that. Thanks so much. This has made my day. This is so good. This is, you know, fun, exciting. And then there were several, like, parent and kid things, and some of those interactions were just powerful things. So again, do you get the restlessness, though, that I felt within that, and the doubt and stuff? And the worst thing is, that's only one of the $100. I still got 2 to go. We do need to talk about God's Word, which we really are talking about the application of God's Word. What good is it if we know it all but don't live lives that are different because of it? But we'll get to some actual Word today. But the other one that I did want to, in my heart, was like helping someone who was having a hard time. That, again, in doing good, we want to see that. And again, I would say it was 100% redemptive work in Starbucks buying people's coffee. I left them convicted. Do not cheapen that. Well, that's just free coffee. That's just goodness. This kind of, no, that was redemptive. What was happening in the place, the way the manager, the way that worker stuff, God was moving through that in that space. Absolutely. The other one was then wanting to help someone more. So I went to the Jewel. It's really Starbucks stacked Jewel in the dollar store is where I try to always go if I'm going somewhere, so I can start to get to know people as I'm new to the community. You only start to know people in the community if you frequently go to the same places and see the same faces, which was really cool with the manager. And I can't wait to see where the relationship with the manager from Starbucks goes, just because we've had some friendly interactions up to this. She knew who I was, even though she didn't know my name, that kind of stuff from being in there. So went to Jewel, same kind of Chicken Little game. I bet they had security, like the secret shoppers that watch people and stuff like that. I'm sure they were following me because I was just doing stupid laps. like doing aisles, just trying to like, maybe they need something, maybe they don't need something, who's up in the checkout, let me go back up there, maybe I can go before them, maybe I can go after them, all this real insanity kind of stuff. But actually end up leaving Jewel doing nothing other than buying like mints and a can of Coke, just so they didn't think I was completely weird, which probably just affirmed that I was completely weird and they could know it going forward. But went to the Dollar Tree. Oh, sorry, this is so long. I went to the Dollar Tree. Long story, still long. Saw a lady in the aisle where I was getting something. I love a kettle corn. In Dollar Store, man, their Pop Secret kettle corn. Like I have to go there and get it sometimes. And she was in that aisle and she was buying like groceries. And so that just is in the world of Dollar Tree and Jewel down there, and why are we getting groceries at Dollar? Okay, this is someone who has some need and this kind of stuff. So don't approach her right in the aisle, because that would be kind of weird, just to hand her money and who am I, kind of sketchy kind of stuff. So I know I want to do something, but I'm waiting for God to open the door. What is that going to be like? End up in line behind her in the cash register, and again, hoping something happens. And I just get the idea as the cash register lady asks her, do you want some sauce? Because she had bought 2 pizza crusts. And she's like, oh, I didn't even think of that. We have some in the back, but she said she was just good. I was like, I'm just going to use pizza sauce as a way in. And be like, well, and this way I was walking up, I was like, well, hey, here's a funny thing, that this week at my church, we were giving out some of our benevolent fund, helping, doing good in our community kind of resources, and I've got 100 to give away. Here, you take that, and I bet it can get you some sauce. And she wasn't like, it wasn't that she didn't have the exact money there, but it was just like the conversation entry point to go get into that, kind of deal. And she was like, whoa, are you kidding me, this kind of thing? And then, again, the gates of heaven just start opening, and the kingdom starts raining and pouring down, and she's going basically nuts and hugging me, saying, this is amazing. The cash register lady's doing that. The same thing of like, what's going on? And again, it's just $100. Like, that's not $1,000. That's more than 10, but it's just $100, and yet, the goodness in the moment and what God was doing in it was this, that she goes out, I check out, she's waiting in the parking lot and wants to introduce her husband to me. So I met her husband, Pink, is what he goes by. They live around here, and she was asking all about the services and what time are those at, and we'll have to check that out, all this kind of stuff, and boom, that happens. That happens if we let our nets down into deep waters, uncertain, sketchy, don't know what's going to happen, pretty much assuming nothing's going to happen, if I'm honest. Maybe a little something will happen, how couldn't it? But nothing real redemptive as far as God doing something amazing. And yet, through that faith step and the actually living out what we say we believe, boom, that happens. So the one other just knew of family in a situation that just all good and stuff, but wanted to be a blessing, that kind of thing. So a note and a letter to somebody that just is encouraging and, again, helping God's work unload and unfold. Does that make sense?
Yep.
In like the kind of Jesus sense, right? That it doesn't make sense, but it does make sense. And like how real that is, and that's the story that we're really playing out. So we did index cards last week to capture some of the stories of what did you do and how did you do that. So we want those turned in just to be able to celebrate and hear and learn from some of those. And then Tori also has more. In case you haven't done that yet, and you know what you're doing, but you still are going to do it, that we want to capture the stories, mainly because of our sharpening one another. One of our memory verses, anyone remember 1 John 1:3? How we sharpen one another and have community. We proclaim to you what we have seen and heard, so that you can have fellowship with us. That means so you can be, like you can know what God's doing in my life and I can know what he's doing in your life. We tell each other what God's doing so that like we're wildly encouraged, because God does stuff when we follow him and when we step out in that kind of faith. And so that's the heart. We're not trying to be braggadocious and get cool stories going. We're trying to just report back on like what God's doing in us, because I'm sure I was more affected by anyone that was blessed, which is true of like missions and loving and serving, and usually what God is up to when he asks us to do something for another. It is usually more about you and changing your heart, your mind, your soul, and your receptivity to him in your life. At least that's the way it was in mine. Let's do this. 2-minute drills, right? Because we're doing boot camp. Let's huddle around, like raise your hand if you had the $100. So raise your hand if you had $100 and gave it away over this last week. Raise your hand. Okay, so see the people with a hand and huddle around them and just hear what they did and how God kind of moved in that. 2-minute drill. Ready? Get up out of your seat, meet them. Again, get to know each other, this kind of thing, a little meet and greet. But listen to the story of what people did and how God used it, and be honest. Really, this is like almost the application before the passage, because of how our passage today about sharing our faith is so related to this. And I think when we look at serving his cause, if we're ultimately doing that in this redemptive sense, of restoring goodness and wholeness and identity and dignity and purpose back into people's lives as we're acting towards them, as we're interacting with them, loving them as we see them, that in a sense that is sharing our faith. That we're acting out on our faith and offering and creating space where that can then be experienced by others, because it's what we believe to be most true in this world and in our lives and for the lives all around us. So it goes so closely with serving his cause is tightly related to sharing your faith, because your faith, there's almost like the capital F faith of accepting Jesus, and then there's lowercase f, or maybe the lowercase and uppercase need to be switched around, but it's like the rest of your life is your faith. You're living it based on what you believe and think is most true and what's most important and who you most are and what you're worth most is worthy of, and your purpose being lived out. It's all so related. Big picture, if we're the body God's calling us to be, the great commandment, this is how all this stuff is fleshing out what it means to love God and love your neighbor. Love your neighbor. Sometimes, spend $100. Be a blessing to people. But we got to be that body that loves God and loves our neighbor. We got to make disciples like Jesus did. We got to help not only ourselves have these faith experiences, but someone we're alongside. How often do we just give information to people that we're hoping find Christ in their life? What about giving them experiences that allow them to experience these same kinds of things? That is how we do discipleship like Jesus did. It was on the go. It was life on life. It wasn't in a classroom, and it wasn't in a small worship space one day a week for an hour. If we're making disciples like Jesus did, our lives are getting entangled with one another. Our lives are entangling other lives around us, and we're all falling into this big mess as we're ultimately chasing God, loving our neighbors, and trying to reach Chicagoland. The purpose is, love God is worship and grow. Loving our neighbors is we love and we reach. This is the first week of the reach characteristics that we're looking at to actually share our faith. But everything since the love God, the worship and growth is kind of snowballing to put our lives in this kind of condition that we almost shouldn't be able to but help share our faith, but help do good to people around us because of the full life we're leading. So week 7, sharing our faith, and ultimately it comes down to this crazy, crazy passage that I think will make so much sense. And I really do hope pictures or causes you to reimagine what we would usually call evangelism and what religion makes evangelism into, versus what Jesus lived out as evangelism, or how he reached out to others so that they would find him in his life, and that they would ultimately, the ultimate goal is salvation, but the process is so different than I think we make it as the church and we make it in religion if we really stick to Jesus style life, and if we really stick to Jesus kind of script of our interactions. So let's look at this passage in Luke 19. I'm going to read the whole passage. This verses 5 through 10 kind of get at the heart of it. When Jesus reached the spot, he looked up and said to him, "Zacchaeus, come down immediately. I must stay at your house today." So we had some Russian interference this morning with our worship technology. We're not kidding. It was a radio station from somewhere that was coming through one of the D boxes that you plug into. Hallelujah. So I didn't want to draw special attention to Sue Johnson. That was Sue Johnson who was Facebooking, and the video that she was Facebooking on went live and started to make noise. Just kidding. It wasn't the Facebook. So he came down at once, welcomed him gladly. All the people saw this. They began to have issues with it. He's gone to be the guest of sinners. But Zacchaeus stood up and said to the Lord, "Look, Lord, here and now I give half of my possessions to the poor, and if I have cheated anybody out of anything, I will pay back 4 times that amount." Jesus said to him, "Today salvation has come to this house, because this man too is a son of Abraham. For the Son of Man came to seek and to save the lost." Let's go through this a little bit verse by verse, and it really plays into, I think, the story of the doing good side of things, and at least what I experienced ultimately with that challenge of blessing people with God's redemptive work through those resources. So, if you go, you might want your device out that you're reading the Bible, or open your Bible to this passage, just because of how I'm going through it. You might want to be underlining, making some notes, that kind of stuff. I believe this was the time of the service John used to say, "I got my Bible, PJ?" Right? I think it was Sherry Lynn who first said, "You realize you're not going to be able to do that, don't you?"
I got my Bible.
Right. That's what she said to me. And I said, "Let's not ever have anyone call me PJ." Okay? So we're going to follow some traditions and keep them, but that is not one of them. Yeah, that's closer. Okay, so Jesus entered Jericho and was passing through. You need to stop there and enter the story yourself, because you need to be thinking about, where do you regularly or irregularly pass through? Because this sets up the whole rest of the story and what Jesus was doing and what his MO was, that Jesus was passing through somewhere. You pass through places. You do it either regularly or you do it irregularly, right? And it's crazy. This is going to sound so ridiculous, but most of us go through every single day, and you don't realize that you pass through places. You just were in some other hurried, anxious, rat race kind of, maybe aloof kind of life, and you didn't realize you were passing through places. Jesus lived a life where he was passing through places, and as we are going to see, that meant something. Jesus entered Jericho and was passing through. If you're going to enter this story and God's word's going to come alive, we've got to right now start thinking, where do we pass through regularly or irregularly? Starbucks, Stacked, Jewel, and the Dollar Tree. I passed through there. A man was there by the name Zacchaeus. He was a chief tax collector and was wealthy. When you are passing through, regularly and irregularly, there are people all around you. And I really would say, whether you know it or not, you are making assumptions about who they are and who they aren't by whatever it is you're observing. You have things in your head that are categorizing them, labeling them, sorting them, sifting them, shifting them from proximity either closer to you because of who you think they are, or farther from you based on who you think they are. And what I was realizing this week is like, I make all of that up. That happens like between my 2 ears, and I was not aware of how much I do that until this last week when I was exercising my faith and holding myself accountable to live it out. There are a whole bunch of things we assume about those we pass by. Tax collector and wealthy. I think the church has done a good job of teaching about what that means. There's good funny jokes about tax collectors and the wealthy and this kind of stuff. But ultimately what's happening in that culture and in the crowd that Zacchaeus is in, everybody that's there is passing through as much as Jesus, but there are these assumed labels of tax collector and wealthy that the culture is making their read and their conclusions about that person. The reality of Zacchaeus, as it says in the next phrase, is he wanted to see who Jesus was. And everything about a tax collector and wealthy and labeling him as a tax collector and wealthy culturally meant he has no interest in Jesus. That's what it ultimately meant. He is hard-hearted. If anything, he doesn't like Jesus. He wouldn't be open to Jesus because of who he is based on the cultural definition and what people wanted to assign him to be. But it wasn't true. They made that up. That his being a tax collector and him being wealthy, that they made up what that meant. And the reality is, he wanted to see who Jesus was. We can miss what is really going on in the heart, in the mind, and in the soul of the people we're passing by, depending on the labels that we're giving them. And I'm assuming all these distances that people want to keep, their thoughts of Christians, their thoughts of Jesus, their thoughts of the church, their thoughts of a pastor, their thoughts of someone doing kindness, all that's filling my head. And if I'm not slowed and allowing the Holy Spirit to fill me and sort those thoughts in a painful way, it was discomforting. It caused me to pout and go to Starbucks in the most basic sense. But because he was short, he could not see over the crowd. Short and crowd equals condition and culture. Similar to tax collector and wealthy, he's short and can't see past the crowds. That this goes, kind of with that same line of thinking of labeling. And yet it ought to be the stuff that we're thinking through that gives us more compassion for somebody because we understand their story. And I don't think this is getting too crazy. Not only was he short, but he also was not tall. That there's one thing about the negative positive of being short in life, but then there's also what you're not in life. So as much as he was short, he was also not tall. Do you think he ever heard that? And as literally as we can reverse engineer the thinking of Zacchaeus growing up, we don't know everything about that culture and I don't think there were playgrounds and recess and kids there, but there were kids and there was play, and reindeer always play reindeer games, which means kids are always kids, know cross-culturally that who they are and what they do and what they're like, and where the greatest hurt so many times happens is so far back, and this kind of stuff that, again, I don't need to go too much into that, but he was short, which means he wasn't tall, that was probably a phrase that got said over and over to him, enough that what was always running through his head, it was a broken tape recorder that affected his identity, probably affected his dignity and his worth. Whose is he? Or who is he really is the identity question. Who are you? Well, he's short and he's not tall. I have a crazy that this was so accidental. My grandma is the most amazing, loving person. Couldn't have been a better grandma, but she accidentally said, I think a couple different times, of how my brother had the higher IQ than I had. And he was and really this would be like school age testing and stuff. He's the smarter one. And that Phil works hard. Phil's the hard worker. Dustin's the smart one. This was not, I didn't grow up exteriorly in that kind of culture, other than, I guess I kind of did, but even more importantly, that got in here. That got in here and affects everything, and everything going on. So if that's in me, what's going on in other people's lives that I'm passing by? And does it fill me with compassion and cause me to walk towards them and be receptive to them? Or does it throw walls up that allow me to keep a distance and keep it safe and comfortable and ultimately irrelevant and not making a difference and leading zero kind of life? So this is what, in the church, just hitting on this a little bit, we do this so much in church culture right now, where we hear this labeling it's called nuns. Have you heard about all the nuns in our culture? The statistic is more people than ever are hitting nun when it comes to religious affiliation. Say, ooh. Man, they're like short, they're like tax collectors, they're like wealthy, they're nuns. Technically, that's how that statistic is playing out in the church. We're using it to say we can't really reach our world. Think of Starbucks, probably full of nuns. They don't want religious affiliation. They're the ones checking none. They don't want good done for them. That's like what's going on in my head. It's part of that. Millennials. Another one, there's the nuns and then there's the millennials. Like, what are we supposed to do? They don't want, think of all the things you hear about the millennials and the labels and all that kind of stuff, and it's not true. The nuns and the millennials and those that are avoiding the crumbling institution of the church, and therefore there's zero trust for it. That there's a bunch of statistics that we as the church, we're making up these they're not tax collectors who are wealthy and short, and therefore, hiding in the crowd or can't see Jesus through the crowd or through the culture. They, technically, biblically speaking, they want to see who Jesus is. They're living and they're doing things in their life to try to see who Jesus is. To the degree, he ran ahead, this is the next phrase, so he ran ahead, climbed a sycamore fig tree so that he could see Jesus past the culture. So he could get up high where he wasn't in his short identity, but he was where his heart wanted to be, seeing Jesus and who he was, and if what he had heard that made him so curious was even true. And he did that because he knew Jesus was coming that way. And when Jesus reached that spot, this is what Jesus did. This is his evangelism style. He was on a path to somewhere among the crowd, and he was looking for people. And what Jesus did is he saw Zacchaeus. That's what he did. On our paths, whether we're regularly or irregularly, are we seeing the people? Are we seeing those that could easily be hidden in the culture, could easily be resistant based on all these ways we've labeled them? Or are we have eyes more like Jesus and looking past that to see who's curious about who he really is? Who's curious about the life I'm leading and why I'm leading it the way that I'm leading it? Who cares if I care about good and share how goodness can be like a boulder in the pond that sends out ripple effects that help God's redemptive work happen? And this is the words Jesus said. Zacchaeus, come down immediately. I must stay with you at your house today. That's Jesus's evangelistic pickup line. It's like, I see you. Come down here. I would like to be with you. Jesus saw him, he encountered him, and he said he wanted to enter his story. Which that really entering his home is like, I want to be in your, help me understand your life. I want to be in your life. I want to be in your story, not succumbing to the labels and assuming I know who you are and conclusions have already been drawn about where you are and all this stuff. Now, let me enter your story and see what you're really like, maybe what you're looking for. There were a whole bunch of evangelistic questions that we think of as the church that we think we're supposed to ask to, share our faith, and do you know if you die tonight where you're going, and some of these things. That's very, very important, but not to somebody's story that's living in a story of angst and broken identity and purpose without dignity. Giving them some of that back, entering the story and joining them in that kind of space like Jesus did, that's when that conversation comes up. You don't lead with that. And you don't, it's not, really, if we got it, it's not even our motive. Our motive is love and wholeness and somebody being set free and realizing God's redemptive work in their life. So he came down at once. He was like, thank you. That's amazing. That's so good. Thanks for doing that. I'm going to do this for someone else someday. Such a receptive response when all he did is saw him, encountered him, and then entered his story. He came down at once and he welcomed him gladly into his house. He was receptive and responsive, not reluctant and resistant. And that's, I think, the biggest label that we put, and whatever names we use for other people to keep our safe distance, we assume resistance and reluctance to the life that Christ calls us into. And it's just not true. That statistically, even speaking today with the study of the nuns, studying the millennials, studying those who've lost trust in the institution of the church, they are still wildly receptive and responsive to humans being like Jesus in their life and bringing Jesus in their life that way. Now, there's a bunch of ways that they're not. If it's religious poison being spread and evangelistic harm and Bible beatings taking place, that never had good space. But if it's this Jesus style, that is a 180-degree difference. All the people saw this. They began to mutter, he has gone to be with the guests of the sinner. Then that sentence just breaks our heart, doesn't it? That the church is really being referred to. The church had a problem with what Jesus was doing because it wasn't about them. And it broke some lines of some what they wanted to be shoulds and coulds, and you shouldn't do that. He shouldn't go be with him. He's a tax collector. He's short. He's wealthy. He's all those things. Why would? And so the church just becomes ugly. The bride, the church, the bride becomes ugly when we are like that. But Jesus doesn't care. He calls us to be like him and know that that's the real beauty of being his body, is when we interact with those that stretch our faith and stretch the thought of what we ought and who we ought to be around and what space we're in when we do that. Zacchaeus stood up, said to the Lord, "Look, Lord, here and now I give you half of my possessions, and I give them to the poor. And if I have cheated anybody out of anything, I will pay back 4 times that amount." What happened was Zacchaeus responded to Christ from being in his presence. He knew his story, and when Jesus was willing to enter his, he was interested in entering Jesus's. It was relational, right? If there was really important things that we have to make sure we say when we're sharing our faith, I think Jesus would have said them. They would have been in red letters, and he would have even said, make sure you say these when you do this. What Jesus said was, it doesn't say anything other than he saw him, he encountered him, and he entered his story, and he brought all of the goodness of his life into his presence. Zacchaeus couldn't help but respond, knowing that that same goodness was in him. It's what he's wanted to be living for. It's what he was created to be living for, but there were things in the way of that. So Jesus said to him, these are his words, "Today salvation has come to this house, because this man too is a son of Abraham. For this is why I came, to seek and save those who are going to be in my path, that I see, that are after me, that are interested, that want to come, that are open, that are receptive. I came to seek and to save them. Come follow me, Jesus said. I will send you out to fish for people. Another invitation of Christ, sharing his faith. Not with Zacchaeus, but this is, I think, this is in all good discipleship material out there that talks about this component and characteristic of sharing our faith. This is the memory verse so that we're thinking like this. Come follow me, Jesus said, and I'll make you fishers of men. Many of us know it as fishers of people. But it's ultimately this, we're entering a story. You're asking someone into your life. You're not trying to give them data. You're not trying to give them information. You're not trying to get them to check a box, say something quick, that kind of thing. It's an invitation that you see them, you encounter them, and then you enter their story and you let them enter your story. That's got to be our DNA of this place. That's the ultimate transformation that we're trying to make in this place, is that we're like that. We have an invitational culture that's Jesus style in this place. How do we not bring friends and family and new people that we just met around because of what's going on here, what we're like and how that's happening? That we'll come to your house, you come to our house. We'll be in your space, you come to our space. This is all like God's redemptive space unfolding. That we need to think that when we share our faith, I'm going to call this capital F faith. It's like your whole story, God's redemptive work in your life and their life and the goodness overflowing through it. That's the invitation that we need to be giving to people, where they will find salvation. Romans 1:16, another good memory verse. For I'm not ashamed of the gospel. I'm not. I may act like Chicken Little, and it's tough to go there in the space because the culture we live in affects me too and is at war in me, but because ultimately it's not about me, it's if I do my part, it's then God who pours out, because it's his power that brings salvation to everyone who believes, first the Jew and then for the Gentile. I think if we let God do that transformational work, like in Zacchaeus' picture, that was a God thing. Jesus just saw him, encountered him, went to his house, was in that space. The power of God caused him to want to give everything he had to the poor and the needy. He got the gospel. He was turning from his ways. We call that repentance. Wanting, committing to live a different life through giving up the old for the new. That's like, God does that. And that's, again, I think most of us, if we go back to our stories, it was not what someone said to us that we got more information, but like our chest cavity was finally able to be opened and we could come out into the life God calls us into. We're just trying to create that kind of space so God does that kind of work in the lives around us. The tool, this is just good to know for your own good, and this is the ultimate. You see these on the seats around. That is, biblically speaking, we do know the how salvation does occur. Accepting Christ's life, accepting actually Christ's death for our life. He died for the sin. He died for the brokenness, the identity, the damage that's been done to it, why we feel worthless and all the sin we've committed and all the sin that has happened to us. We know, and we find salvation through Christ, because that was what his death was all about, so that we could have life, and why he came back to life was to conquer that, and the resurrection and the power of that restores our lives to live alive for Christ and in this world. So like this, I love like, I don't do it daily, but it's always around me, and tools like this are always around me because it's reminding me of the truth and of the power of God, and that it can happen, and to be equipped with it, to even just be able to pass that to somebody that's been in the space with you, that you saw, you entered their story, you encountered them, leave them with something to think about so that the next time you get back together, there's better conversation. Okay, daily practice. I purposely didn't look at my phone so I could be accidentally over. Okay, thanks. This is it though, we're landing the plane, I promise. In your daily time with God, designate a page or a place in your notebook or journal. Like, I would cry my eyes out if us as a body, as we've been going through this series, and every week we're talking about the application is developing our daily time with God, I would hate if we weren't doing that. Like that would be like Jesus would, I'll take myself out of the picture. Jesus would like hate that. That wouldn't make any sense with God's word that says we don't want to just be hearers of the word, we got to be doers of the word. We got to be doing this stuff. So this is someone assuming we're doing this stuff, right? That as we're doing it, designate a place in that notebook or that journal where you can create your Z list. Your Z list is a place to track and pray for the people God is bringing into your path. So you're actually even identifying your paths, regular and irregular, being intentional and prayerful about that. And you're on the lookout. Again, this is what I think, to reach everybody is not your responsibility. To see who God brings into your path is. And again, there were crowds that Jesus walked through. He saw one and interacted with the one, and it made all the difference. Are we seeing the one? Are we seeing just the few? That's our responsibility. Your Z list is a place to track and pray for the people God is bringing into your path who you have the opportunity to see, acknowledge, enter their story, share your faith with. Make it a regular pattern to revisit this list in your journal or in your notebook that you keep, or however you organize to be intentional about this in the lives and the relationships God is calling you to reach. Make sense? And then as a body, because this is like the locker room and we play as a team, I mean, we don't go out here and this isn't golf. So everybody go out that door and go play your round of golf by yourself. We do this as a team. This is part of our conversations, again, in our households, at the dinner table, when we come and when we go, when we meet, when we have breakfast. Let's be talking about this stuff. How's your time with God going daily? What are you doing to do that? How's the list? Again, we've done other people mapping of who are some mentors, who are some people you're asking to disciple you, who's some people God's putting in your path for you to disciple. It's kind of what we're talking about here today, that we got to start living this stuff out daily. This cannot be a once-a-week affair, getting like re-reminded and excited about it for a minute, but then letting it fade by the minute that we go out this door. We got to keep this alive in us and heighten it in us to be this body that God is calling us to be. Feel a little bit like the drill sergeant in the Fit Body Boot Camp, but we have to. We have to. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, we're so thankful for the life of your Son. You sent to die for us, to overcome death for us so that we may have life. And yet you sent him here to have a life that we can study, that we can see, that we have a life to become like, a target to aim at, to know whether we're doing and living the life that you call us to. So we're thankful for your Son for that. We're thankful for Jesus and his life that patterns the life that we're supposed to lead as his church, as his body in this world today. We need your help to do so much better, than we're currently doing. If we're a line, I'm in the front of it, needing that help to just stay faithful, to stay stretched, to stay uncomfortable, to stay anxious because we know you're at work and you're reaching others and it's not about us, but you're calling us into this life that we don't know yet. It's uncertain, it's unknown. Help us go there. Disrupt, this is scared to say this, but disrupt our lives to cause us to be more the way you want us to be. bring us together to love one another, to sharpen each other, so that we actually do these things. We're accountable. We're excited. We're encouraged by the stories as we share them of how you're moving and what you're doing. Help us get that kind of picture for the lives we're leading, the church you're calling us to become, and the work that can ultimately happen through that of reaching new people. Reaching Zacchaeuses everywhere. Each of us if each of us do this with one, that doubles us. That's amazing, the work and the way you could pour out through that. So we ask for that to happen. Hear our hearts. They're ahead of our minds, I think. They're ahead of our bodies. But hear our hearts that we do desire this to happen in this season. We do desire this to happen in this place. And bring your kingdom, bring your will, and have your way with us. So we thank you, and we pray all these things in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
You are dismissed. Let's go and live like this. If you're part of the Connections team, there's going to be a huddle and a meeting downstairs as that's getting organized. A lot of cool things like that happening, new teams forming, new adventures happening, so make sure you're becoming a part of that. And we'll see you around this week.
Hey, Trace, come here. Come up here.